Make up mine. Fight.
Do you want to know why Spy is such a popular class pick amongst new TF2 players, despite its high skill and knowledge requirements? It's because the concept of slinking in undetected, infiltrating the enemy team, and securing a clean, efficient instant kill is incredibly enticing. There are entire game franchises based around this concept, so for Valve to have implemented it into a multiplayer game as early as 2007 is an inspired choice. That said, I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we ever pretended Spy was anywhere near the best class in the game, so sometimes you want to experience the thrill of sneaking around and instantaneously dropping foes from advantageous positions on a more consistent and reliable body. In this video, I want to talk about the weapons that allow you to do that. These are TF2's non-spy backstab weapons, or as I call them, stealth weapons. These are weapons that only grant their tangible bonuses when striking enemies from behind or where they least expect it, and can turn the classes that they're featured on into honorary balaclava-wearing chain smokers. I want to stress that we're only talking about weapons that deal extra damage or otherwise provide bonuses on back attack, and not any weapon with a stealth mechanic like the Tomislav's Quieter Rev, for example. All that said, let's roll.
The enemy's coming from behind. Take care of the guy behind me, Fox.
We're going to be starting this video off with a discussion on the backscatter, which is basically the TF2 video equivalent to opening a 10-course meal with plain unflavored rice.
Yeah, but what's the flavoring? It's rice flavored.
I want to stress right out of the gate, I don't at all think that the backscatter is a bad weapon. In fact, while recording footage for this video, I was pleasantly surprised with its performance and very quickly found myself consistently racking up small kill streaks. That said, I do think that this weapon at a base level is staggeringly, sinfully boring. It's got an incredibly simple first draft-esque lineup of stats, and to me, almost feels like a concept that could have been modded into the game. Like, this is the kind of weapon design you see in a Steam Workshop thread or a Weapon Concepts YouTube video, not the actual game. Its complete list of patches since release on its wiki page is only like 4 lines long. All that is to say, I enjoy using the backscatter, but find it to be a pretty uninspired weapon. But why is that? Let's dive in and find out. The backscatter is an unlockable primary weapon for Scout added in the coveted Love and War update. A phallically shaped lever-action shotgun, this weapon's primary attribute is its ability to deal mini-crits when attacking enemies from medium to close range and behind. This, combined with its otherwise uncompromised damage compared to stock, means that it can comfortably one-shot light classes when the chips stack precisely in its favor. To offset this powerful ability, this weapon only loads 4 shots before needing to reload compared to stock 6, and features a noticeably harsher and less accurate spread, making it even more reliant on close-range flanking engagements and smart positioning than Scout's other scatterguns. So right out of the gate, the backscatter is a weapon that wears its intended function on its sleeve. This is a weapon that flourishes as a powerful flanking and chasing tool, allowing the player to use Scout's slippery movement and potent area traversal to sneak around behind enemies and rack up some real damage. As a trade-off, it noticeably suffers as a mid-range direct combat tool, with its combination of fewer and less accurate shots, making it pale in comparison to Scout's other options and face-to-face with enemies who were actively fighting back. That said, it's also extremely fundamental, asking very little in the ways of significant playstyle adjustments to make the most out of it. You'll likely already be flanking a Scout, and it's not completely unusable as a close-range weapon, just a little bit more awkward. The most glowing endorsement I can make for the backscatter is that at its absolute weakest, you're basically just dealing with a moderately more awkward version of the stock scattergun, and at its absolute best, you're dealing with a version of it that can one-shot semi-consistently. It basically takes Scout's fundamental role as a class as a potent close-range flanker and burst damage dealer, and accentuates both its positives and negatives to a very specific degree. It deals the same amount of damage, has the same number of pellets, and fires at the same rate as stock. It is strictly defined by being stronger in one specific instance and weaker in most others. If you can get down with that, you'll probably like the backscatter a lot. If you're in the mood for something a bit more interesting though, this weapon will definitely leave you wanting. At a base, you'll be getting the most out of the backscatter when attacking enemies' backs. Great script, Opal. The range and positioning you need to attack enemies from to actually deal a mini-crit is incredibly vague and sometimes poorly designed, and is often indicated entirely by lag compensation and hitbox jank, leading to somewhat frequent situations where you'll either fail to deal a mini-crit when you really should, or will deal a mini-crit when you otherwise really shouldn't. This is not an exclusive issue to the backscatter or even to this video. Virtually every position-dependent mechanic in TF2, aside from headshots, suffers from this trait to some extent, but on a weapon that lives and dies by the consistency of its one positive, it's especially noteworthy. I do find it to function as intended more often than not, and find the jank to honestly be more beneficial than it isn't, so I'll take it over a weapon just straight up not working. When the backscatter works though, I'll be honest, it really works. Sneaking behind enemies and just firing shot after shot, pelting them with hefty mini crits that leave most classes hurting after only 1 or 2 is very fun and effective. With some smart positioning and attacks of opportunity, you can be an absolute menace to the enemy team with this thing. A very frequent and satisfying situation I found myself in was sneaking behind an entire group of enemies and cleanly taking out each member before they could react. Aside from Spy, this is the closest I get to feeling like a genuine assassin in TF2. Additionally, this weapon is exceptional for cleaning up particularly important single targets like medic, snipers, and enemy team anchors. Scout is already one of the strongest flankers in the game and does these things with gusto at a base level, and this weapon takes his ability to efficiently clean up key targets and just sticks it with about a horse tranquilizer's worth of oomph juice. Additionally, this weapon is great as a chasing tool. This isn't the only weapon in this video that we'll be saying this about, but it really can't go understated just how effective this thing is at cleaning up enemies when they foolishly try and escape from the person shooting them with a gun. Any enemy who's non-observant enough to turn their backs on you while you're using this thing will be treated to a swift and decisive mollywhopping. It's almost like people just don't see what weapons their enemies are using, and this is a cognitive failing on their parts that is very easy to capitalize on. Plus, just maneuvering intelligently around enemies and taking attacks of opportunity when you see their backs can be a very strong knowledge and mechanical execution check for those enemies. So, in essence, the weapon designed to deal extra damage to enemies from behind is very good at dealing extra damage to enemies from behind. It meshes very well with Scout's base mechanics as a class, and despite my belly aching about it being boring, does make sense as a concept for the class. It's definitely a bit white bread flavored, but it works, it's fun, and that's all that matters. That said, it is still an astonishingly middle-of-the-road weapon, and it's primarily due to its 2 main negatives contrasted against its uninspired positive. Starting with what I find to be the less severe negative, its lower accuracy and harsher spread can definitely make things a bit difficult. It's not exceptionally damning or weapon ruining, it's not like the Beggar's Bazooka's projectile deviation, for example, but it is noticeable beyond close range. It makes fights from medium to longer ranges totally out of the Scout's control, even more so than usual, and significantly hampers his usual strategy of dodging around enemies while delivering his own attacks. I swear that the pellets on this thing just go wherever the hell they want, and it can make lining up what should be guaranteed meat shots noticeably less consistent than it would be otherwise. Combine this with the already present random bullet spread, and you've got a gun that's basically shooting blanks a good 30 to 40% of the time. That said, there are fringe situations where the accuracy penalty can allow a pellet or two to line up and secure a cheeky undeserved mini crit on a fleeing enemy, so it's a bit of a two-way street, if one of those ways led to a crack den. No, the stat I find to be way more severe on the backscatter is its clip size penalty. It cannot go overstated just how much Scout lives and dies by his clip. His lengthy reload and committal firing speed mandate making good use of each shot, and on a weapon that's notorious for missing what should be guaranteed high damage hits, and already asks for very strategic attacks of opportunity to get the most out of it, having 2 less shots per clip is exceptionally rough. It does feel proportionate to the weapon's strength as an ambush tool, since it'll likely take a shot or 2 less to kill someone with mini crits anyways, but in any situation where you and the enemy are actively exchanging bullets and you are not behind them, this is strictly a negative that aggressively accentuates what's already one of Scout's biggest weaknesses. Due to this combination of negatives and the somewhat janky nature of this weapon's only positive, I'd say the biggest fault in the backscatter on a gameplay level is just that it's very inconsistent. It feels like any given exchange with it could go any number of entirely different ways based on how many pellets connect and whether or not the game actually registers your mini crits. It's a very fun weapon, make no mistake, and can absolutely dominate servers with proper usage and a bit of luck, but it's also remarkably awkward and very unreliable. So me at work. All in all, the backscatter is not a bad weapon. It's a weapon of tepid highs and uninteresting lows, and one that comfortably skirts between either end of TF2's ever-contentious balance spectrum. It's like the dictionary definition of a middling weapon. No extremely overbearing positives or weapon-killing negatives, just a lineup of so-so mechanics that ultimately result in a fiercely inoffensive weapon. If you want to play TF2 with like the Bob's Burgers of Scout primaries, then this will be the weapon for you. It's charming, fun, and novel, yet also inconsistent and fails to hit either the highs or lows of its contemporaries. Okay, maybe that was unfair. I like Bob's a lot more than the backscatter. Either way, the backscatter is the premier example of a meh TF2 weapon, or mid as the kids call it. Not bad, not great, it's just a bit boring.
Tomorrow in my butt.
From one back-based weapon to another, it's Pyro's Backburner. This is an interesting case to me, as despite the weapon's age and standing as one of the oldest unlockable weapons in the game, it's never really at the top of anyone's mind for serious balanced discussion. It's one of the more low-key weapons in the game for sure, especially in regards to Pyro. Like, 1 in every 10 conversations people have about TF2 will be complaining about Pyro and their weapons, so the fact that you don't often hear people bring up the Backburner is interesting. Oh, it's brain dead, it's W plus M1, it's a gibbous weapon, you say. Bro, I made heavy, that's not balanced discussion, that's every 4th comment on one of my YouTube videos. So I want to talk in earnest about the Backburner. See just what it is about this weapon that's caused it to lag behind in terms of technical discussions of Pyro's weapons. The Backburner is an unlockable achievement flamethrower for Pyro, and its stats are as follows. It deals guaranteed critical hits when striking enemies from behind, making it extremely effective at dealing with fleeing enemies or for ambushes, at the cost of requiring 50 damage per air blast as opposed to stock's 20. This means that from full ammo, you can air blast exactly 4 times with the Backburner, less than half of the 10 that are possible with stock. It also boasts all the other perks that affect every other flamethrower, such as healing 20 health upon extinguishing teammates and slowing down medic healing while flaming them. This ultimately results in a weapon that accentuates Pyro's role as a close-range combat-oriented ambush killer, while moving away from their role as an air blast-focused team supporter. So, funny story, the Backburner was added in 2008's Pyro update, the second significant content update in TF2's history, and one that was explicitly focused around livening up Pyro as a class. On release, Pyro was frequently criticized as the game's weakest and most boring character. Prior to this update, they couldn't even air blast. It was added in this patch, and Valve, in their infinite wisdom, decided to bolster their then newest class-specific update focus on fixing the game's problem character by adding a weapon that lacked that update's most important new mechanic. Yes, like the modern-day Flog, the released Backburner could not air blast at all. I'm telling you this primarily to demonstrate just how fucking far this weapon has come. It could be so much worse than it is. Starting from the top, the Backburner's namesake positive is really fun to put into practice. A stream of constant critical flames deals anywhere from 260 to 520 damage a second, or enough to melt every class in the game in around 2 to 3 seconds max. Compared to a non-critical flame, this is an obvious and massive increase in potential damage, and significantly truncates the amount of time required to kill any given enemy. It is worth noting though that the hitbox of what's considered an enemy's back is a little bit vaguely defined. Compared to a backstab, which has an effective range of about 180 degrees behind a player's immediate view, the Backburner's radius is more so around 90 degrees, making the actual area you need to hit in order to deal critical damage on enemies significantly more strict. You won't be seeing a lot of Backburner face stabs, for example. This can actually make lining up an enemy for some crits surprisingly tricky and inconsistent, so at a base, I'd recommend treating the crits more as a potential bonus that applies sometimes, rather than a fallback you should be defaulting to all of the time. While this might make the Backburner seem a bit useless, I'd say the crits trigger just often enough in the average match for it to be worth it. Plus, this weapon is functionally identical to stock otherwise when it comes to flame specifically, so no playstyle adjustments to direct combat will have to be made in order to accommodate it. When you're using the Backburner, an important thing to keep in mind is that when talking specifically about pressing mouse 1, you are functionally using the stock flamethrower with the ability to deal situationally guaranteed crits. So anything you can do with the primary attack of the stock flamethrower is equally possible with the Backburner. Not unlike the Backscatter, it's very common for enemies to not realize what you're attacking them with and attempt to flee. This puts them in prime backburning position, and all around demonstrates just how strong this weapon is as a pure fire damage oriented weapon. If air blast didn't exist, this thing would just straight up be an objective upgrade over stock. Its flames are entirely identical with an additional extremely strong situational positive. With the right combination of tools, a Backburner Pyro who knows what they're doing can be a frightening thing to contend with. Combined with the thermal thruster or detonator, which both grant Pyro on-command mobility and self-repositioning, being able to crop up exactly where the enemy team does not expect, and melting them with a stream of flames so strong that even the Fury would be shaking in its boots, is very fun and rewarding. More so than any other Pyro primary, the Backburner rewards smart positioning and picking your battles intelligently. It has a reputation for being a very brain-dead weapon, and it absolutely can be. You can totally just W plus M1 at people with it and call it a day, but the difference between a W plus M1 Backburner player and a Backburner player who knows how to capitalize on its strengths is night and day. Unfortunately, all of this only applies to mouse 1, and there is another button on your mouse to press. With it comes this weapon's absolutely huge soul negative, a plus 150% air blast cost, or a requirement of 50 ammo per air blast. This is pretty damn important. In situations where you're attempting to displace an enemy, reflect large amounts of spam, or extinguish multiple teammates at once, you will very quickly find yourself running out of ammo. Keep in mind that you only get 4 air blasts from maximum ammo, and that if you flame for just 1 second second, you only get 3. Air Blast is such a fundamental part of Pyro's game plan that I can easily see this being a make or break stat for a lot of players. It exists right alongside the Flog in that regard, and if you know my opinion about the Flog, then you should know that I'm not a huge fan of that. That said, I don't have nearly as much beef with this weapon as I do with the Flog. My primary grievance with the Flog is that it completely strips away Pyro's ability to Air Blast, thus narrowing Pyro's game plan significantly and severely limiting the number of plays they're capable of making. I firmly believe Pyro is not the easiest class in TF2, simply due to the number of avenues Air Blast opens up. Reflect is obviously one, but there's also stuff like rocket surfing and disconnecting Ubers. It does take skill and knowledge of the class to get good at these kinds of things. Stripping away that ability severely narrows Pyro's gameplay and lowers their skill ceiling dramatically. But here's the thing, the Backburner doesn't really strip that ability away. It just makes you have to be smarter and more selective in how you use it. Whereas the Flog completely removes the ability to Air Blast, the Backburner simply adds more consideration for when and how to use it. If you're using the Backburner for combat, like air blasting an enemy to combo or trap them, the cost likely won't mean much since you'll be picking up their ammo pack anyways. In other situations, you simply have to be smarter and more calculated in how you use it. I wouldn't say the Backburner discourages using Air Blast. It just requires more thought when using it than stock. You'll have to carefully consider each individual Air Blast, patiently awaiting the perfect reflect or selectively extinguishing the right teammate, rather than just air blasting someone over and over again willy-nilly. It's much harsher in terms of how many times you can use it, but otherwise functions identically. A lot of enemies seem to think you're completely unable to air blast when you use this thing, and I've caught quite a few opponents off guard by reminding them that yes, my gun can still in fact blow hot air. The amount of times I've seen a demo man just deactivate after being air blasted by this thing is too high to be coincidental. This obviously does not apply to every situation though. There are 100% times where you'll absolutely notice a stricter air blast cost than others. Specifically, situations where you'd be using the air blast for consistent defense are where I feel it really falls flat. Attempting to repeatedly air blast a single target to disconnect Ubers can be exceptionally difficult and unsafe with this weapon, and you won't be able to counter rocket spam or otherwise interrupt the enemy plays as effectively, which are some of Pyro's most important roles in a defensive setting. Additionally, dealing with large influxes of spam and incoming damage, or trying to keep your team topped off in the face of an aggressive enemy Pyro is really difficult, and borderline impossible if enough fire is going around. It's simply not as versatile or safe to fall back on as the stock flamethrower. And that's ultimately the dichotomy of the Backburner. Its primary attack is, all things considered, just stock but better. It's like the Backscatter again, just the same thing with a situational upside. However, the significance of its increased air blast cost cannot go ignored. This thing is a liability to your team to bring along. It does hamper Pyro's class-defining team utility. And while it isn't as strict about it as the Flog or even the Dragon's Fury, there will be situations where you'll be standing around shrugging as your team dies around you. I wouldn't necessarily describe the Backburner as selfish, but it is most certainly a flamethrower that focuses on the Pyro using its enjoyment and not their team's enjoyment. Pyro is Air Blast, and Air Blast is Pyro. And while every unlockable flamethrower does nerf it in some capacity, I hope you're damn good at taking advantage of those crits to justify bringing this weapon over one that can more consistently help your team. It's not anywhere near bad, just a weapon you have to know what you're signing up for when you equip it. So I sure am glad it's a new player achievement item.
Look out, Earth. I'm dreaming of a red Xmas.
Ah, we're finally on my home turf. The Holiday Punch is a weapon I've discussed in the weapon subcategory series before, specifically in the Christmas weapons episode, which I'm pretty certain is the least viewed episode of the series, but that's neither here nor there. In that video, I discussed it being my favorite heavy melee and one of my favorite melee weapons in the game, and spent a significant chunk of the video generally gassing it up as an underrated contender within Heavy's melee lineup. That said, a few people were quick to call my bluff, pointing out several situations where the Holiday Punch fails to deliver as consistently as I may have led people to believe. I try to take comments like this seriously, as I generally want my videos to be as close to the true TF2 casual experience as possible, so I've been eager to revisit the Holiday Punch for a bit. Let's dive in. The Holiday Punch is an unlockable melee weapon for Heavy, a pair of festive Smith mittens. These gloves function identically to the stock fists in terms of damage, attack speed, and range. Their main positive, however, is their ability to force an enemy into their laughing taunt or schadenfreude upon either a successfully landed critical hit or a punch from behind. This effectively stuns enemies in place for the duration of the taunt and takes them out of whatever animation they were performing at the time the punch landed. As an arguable negative, critical hits and back punches with this weapon deal no damage, instead always forcing the enemy into their laughing taunt. Additionally, Heavies wielding the Holiday Punch will always be made to laugh when attacking other Holiday Punch Heavies. This is an item that, from first impressions, may seem like nothing more than a goofy novelty or funny meme weapon, and in a lot of cases, it is. If you're just pulling out your holiday punch and running at enemies fishing for a crit, you're basically throwing. There is a legitimate argument to be made that you'd be better off in most situations just shooting enemies with your minigun, rather than lengthening the process of killing them by making them laugh first. Using the holiday punch for its own sake isn't too dissimilar from any other throw meme strategy in TF2. That said, this is a weapon that flourishes the most when the player realizes when and how to use it. When you're just throwing out punches willy-nilly, this weapon is definitely a bit of a meme, but when you're taking advantage of its unique technical quirks, it's one of the most impactful melee weapons in the entire game. Here's the thing, forcing an enemy to taunt or emote in a skill-based, execution-based FPS is incredibly strong at a base conceptual level. Taunts cannot be cancelled in TF2, and think about how many times either you or an enemy has been killed because they chose to do a funny animation at the wrong time. Being able to force an enemy into a several second long, unskippable, and uncancelable animation is borderline broken on a base conceptual level. This is comparable to an on-command stun or CC effect disguised as a funny meme, and it's further compounded by the specific taunt that's forced being the laughing taunt, which tends to be on the longer end of each class's taunt lineups. For example, Spy's Schadenfreude taunt is only slightly shorter than the length of an Uber charge. Simply put, you can no-sell the hell out of some very impactful plays with the holiday punch. Most notably, this weapon's stun goes through Uber charges, allowing a properly timed holiday punch attack to completely stifle an enemy's potentially game-winning Uber push. This is fucking hilarious, and objectively an incredibly strong trait. There are very few consistent stock Uber counters in TF2, so the fact that this weapon can not only potentially act as the most effective one on offer, but also do it to any other type of Uber charge or buff is very funny. From my experience, enemies don't often tend to identify the immediate threat of a holiday punch heavy poking at them, and tend to turn their Uber focus towards sentries or other key targets, and this is very easy to take advantage of. With Uber charge comes tunnel vision on what's deemed the most important target, so with proper positioning and timing, you can be the thing that saves your team from an impactful push. You may think that heavy slow movement speed and general inconspicuousness would make securing consistent holiday punch stuns difficult, but from my experience, it's remarkably easy to position yourself in such a way that you won't be the enemy's immediate first target. In the event of an Uber push, the holiday punch heavy will likely not be the enemy's highest priority to shoot. Plus, if you're really evil, you can crouch and backpedal and pretend you're friendly, and then swiftly betray anyone who's foolish enough to believe you. Who says heavy can't be spy? Again, when you're just running at enemies fishing for crits, the holiday punch is a certified gimmick. But when you use it intelligently and opportunistically, you can get some real mileage out of it. Now, that's all well and good, but there is one key trait of the holiday punch that does keep it in check against particularly astute enemies. You cannot make airborne targets laugh. Taunts can only be activated on solid ground in TF2, meaning that all it takes for the enemy to no-sell your no-sell is to jump repeatedly. This is the definitive counter to the holiday punch. All you have to do to avoid being stunned is mash your spacebar. And while it is possible for the heavy to find the perfect opportunity to punch you between your jumps, this is exceptionally difficult and requires a lot of server end timing on the heavy part. It's not always applicable, like obviously a revved up heavy doesn't have the option to do this, but any other class can comfortably skirt around a potential holiday punch stun by simply jumping. Additionally, on servers where random crits are disabled, or in situations where you can't comfortably secure a cheeky back punch, like on maps where you can't get behind the enemy, the holiday punch is pretty much dead on arrival, unfortunately. This weapon is gimmicky and reliant on specific circumstances to flourish by nature, and it won't be much of an all-around generalist utility as much as something like the Fists of Steel or Fast Gloves. It's incredibly impactful in the right situations, but only in those situations. Because of this, as the name of this video would imply, the holiday punch works best as a stealth weapon. It's very fun and funny to run up on enemies and brute force a stun through random crits, but the holiday punch works best when you're able to hit enemies with it before they realize what you're doing. The moment an enemy realizes what you're attempting to do is the moment the holiday punch crumbles, so more so than even the backscatter or backburner. This is a weapon that mandates extremely careful positioning, timing, and opportunistic fight picking to make the most out of it. It will not be perfect in every situation, and it does have concrete counterplay, but when it works, it really works. This isn't a weapon you equip expecting to make use of it constantly. It's a weapon you equip in case the circumstance where it's useful pops up, and when that circumstance does pop up, it is the most impactful weapon in the game. Ultimately, the holiday punch is still my favorite heavy melee by a fine margin, but it'd be disingenuous of me to pretend it doesn't have any shortcomings. It's incredibly effective and fun at its best, yet situational and easily countered at its worst. It's still hilarious to block an Uber charge or interrupt a potentially game-winning play, but I appreciate the comments in my Christmas weapons video for helping me realize that the holiday punch isn't as perfect as I initially thought. It's still great, still fun, and still effective in the right situations, but requires careful finesse and a lot of luck to make the most out of it. Just like Christmas shopping for a particularly picky family member, the holiday punch is a gamble. Sometimes it'll bring loads of Yuletide joy, and other times it'll only bring crushing disappointment. I still love it though. So there's a look at TF2 stealth weapons, or its non-spy backstab weapons. Something you might have noticed is that, with exception to the holiday punch, these weapons tend to be pretty boring on a design level. It's like Valve views situationally guaranteed bonuses based on positioning as like a singular weapon-defining trait all on its own, and absolutely refuses to iterate on these concepts aside from that. That said, I still think these weapons are very fun to use and make you feel like a legitimate big brain badass when they work. I'll take some conceptually boring weapons that are fun in practice and work over overly ambitious weapons that fail to consistently deliver. All in all, this discussion should have shown that Spy isn't alone as TF2's assassin archetypal character. Maybe he has more in common with his fellow mercs than he thinks. Or maybe not. Either way, thanks, hope you all have a fantastic day before, during, and after watching, and I'll catch you all later. Cheers!